Right, yeah. All right, so welcome everyone to today's installment of the Appalachian Natural History Seminar Series. Today we are joined by Dr. Sarah Hall, who's currently a associate professor in Ag and Natural Resources at Berea. You're originally from Central Kentucky, which I don't think I knew that, but that's cool. Spent much of your childhood outdoors, developing a love of nature. She gained a newfound appreciation for her home during an undergraduate course in Appalachian Studies, part of her degree in environmental education at Appalachian State. She completed a master's and PhD at UK, focusing on ecological restoration in grasslands and forests. And more recently, her research focus has been on traditional agricultural practices in the Appalachian region. And so today you're here to share with us about your work on planting by the signs. So we are super excited to hear about that. I'll go ahead and just pull your, hopefully that'll pull the presentation up without exploding it. Okay, good. Does that look good?
Great.
Zoomland people, does that look good? Zoomland friends? Hopefully. All right. Looks like they should be able to see your screen fine. So, okay. Take it away. Feel free to share more about your academic journey and so on.
All right. Well, thanks, Kenton, for inviting me here today, and thanks to you all for showing up on a Friday afternoon, where I know it's the part of the term where people are starting to maybe be able to see the end in sight. So I appreciate you all coming. I'm going to be talking a little bit about what was my sabbatical research actually in the 2018-2019 school year, and has kind of continued to develop and grow into a book that will actually be out in March of 2023. So it'll be out next year. I've got the final files into my editor. I know the name of it now, and the cover's getting designed. So anyway, it's going to happen. That's exciting. It has been an incredible amount of work, and it's very different from my sort of science background. So I did look last night at the syllabus for this class, and I see that you all are supposed to be STEM focused. So I'm going to do what I can to try to.
You can go full social.
Yes, I see that it's interdisciplinary, so that's good because yeah, this is definitely a little different, but I'll talk also a little bit about kind of where science fits in a little bit. So I guess with that, I'm like trying to decide as we go through here. I want to make sure that we have time to do a little activity. And I also want to play a lot of audio clips from people that I interviewed. So I'm going to do that. And I want to sort of center their voices rather than mine. So I'm going to try to do that. And I think I'm going to sort of skip through. I have a little narration about how the project came to be, but I'm just going to describe that a little bit with the pictures that are up here. So I had worked at the Kentucky State University Research Farm prior to my starting at Berea, and I met this fellow named John Clay. He had stopped by one day when I was in the greenhouse at the research farm, and he gave me these seeds, and I remember he told me that they would go an inch deeper in the soil if I planted them at a certain time than if I planted them at other times. I did not remember, I mean, I cannot tell you when that time was. I just remember that he said that. And I took those seeds from him. They were, he called them mushmelon seeds that he said his family had brought from Arkansas. And I put them in my seed box, which I've always put in my freezer every year between planting my garden. And I kind of forgot about it. And so when I got the job at Berea, and started teaching there, one of the things I was able to do was to develop a course in something that I was interested in. And so I developed a course called Appalachian Plants and People. And so it allowed me to really marry my interests in native plants and how people have used them. And that was kind of where my focus was when I developed the class. But I made sure to have a significant portion of the class be projects that, individual projects that students did so that they could explore something they were really interested in. And in those projects, it became apparent that some students were really interested in agriculture and interested in thinking about those plants too, right? So not just native plants present in our forests or grasslands, but also plants that had been introduced. And so in that process, and also, in thinking about the class in general, I'd spent a lot of time with the Foxfire books. So you all did a brief reading from the original Foxfire book on planting by the signs. And there's 2 other readings in later Foxfire books. So those ones come, that series of books comes from what originally was was a magazine project, which before that even was just a high school English class where an instructor started sending, and this is down in Rabun County, Georgia. He started sending his students out to do little oral history type projects with people that they knew there locally. That turned into sort of what they did, turned into little magazine articles. So there was a magazine, and then some of those were compiled into books. I think there's 14 now, and the latest ones, I want to say the 14th one was published maybe in like 2004, something like that, early 2000s. So that's the Foxfire books, and you all saw a little piece of that from the original that was published, I think 1963 or something. Yeah, I think it was sometime in the 60s was the very first one was published. So anyway, had sort of then, read about planting by the signs, and it kind of made me think like, oh, I remember, Mr. Clay mentioning that to me. And so as I was thinking about what I wanted to do for my sabbatical, I just got really interested in this idea of talking to people who plant by the signs. I had done some research, and basically other than the Foxfire books, there wasn't a lot of, published written kind of stuff on it. Even though it's pretty well known. So what there are is a lot of these calendars and almanacs. I've put a lot of those laying around that some of you, has anybody seen anything like this? Either the Farmer's Almanac or some of these calendars, quite a few of you got on your heads. So these are around, right? People are clearly using them because they exist. But there's not a whole lot of kind of written record about it. So anyway, I decided that's what I wanted to do. And the only sort of missing piece of being able to do that project was trying to document in photographs. And this is Meg Wilson, who was actually a Berea College student at the time. When we initially agreed for her to do it, she wasn't a Berea College student yet. She had applied, she didn't tell me. And then when we were getting ready to do the work, she was like, well, actually, I got accepted. Luckily, we were able to work out an independent study for her where basically her going around and doing the work was able to fit in, because Berea's student schedules are incredibly tight because they have a labor position and all their classes. So anyway, it worked out that she was able to do it, and her pictures are incredible, and her photos are what you will see in this presentation. I don't want to take any credit for any of them. On the last slide, actually, you'll be able to see one that I took that is not nearly as good as all of her portraits, but she wasn't able to be there that day. Okay, so you see a quote there from Foxfire. I'm just going to go ahead and play. This picture here is Bill Best, who is pretty well known. He's in Madison County and has worked to save heirloom seeds for a long time. He's got 2 books on heirloom seeds. And anyway, he is there. Oh, there we go. I can't actually see my notes. So this little audio clip I'm going to play is from Gary Easton from Gallatin County. And he's going to talk a little bit about how he learned about the practice of planting by the signs. I interviewed him and his wife together, so you'll hear him refer to her, and he's talking about Goldie, his wife.
When we grew up there, and Mike and I had lived there all of our lives, growing up in her family and my family, our parents were concerned about signs. Our primary cash crop when we were growing up was tobacco. And, there were certain times of the year when the signs were not good for planting tobacco. Both her parents and my parents agreed on the same thing. There were certain days that you just didn't plant tobacco. And that carried over into, even though we're not involved in tobacco at all and have been for years, that carried over into our lives in the gardening and the flower garden process. So we held on to that. We do plant gardens and flowers. We trim fruit trees by the signs of the moon, the signs of the zodiac. So it's been an important part of our background growing up, and it still is today. Maybe not a lot of scientific proof, but it's traditions that's carried down from grandparent to parents to children.
There's just a couple more photos that Meg has taken. This is one of the people that I interviewed, Susanna Leon of Salamander Springs Farm, just outside of Berea. She uses the biodynamic calendar or the Stella Natura calendar, which is around, it's a little bit different, but it's definitely sort of, it has common roots. But it's the only of the calendars that is actually astronomically based, not astrologically based. And you all read a little bit about that in the chapter, if you did that reading, that it's a little bit different. So that is the one that is actually calculated based on where the stars are in the sky. So I'm going to go through this relatively quickly because you all saw some of this in the chapter if you took a look at that. But basically, we've got the moon's cycle around the Earth, right, around 28 days, something like that. It actually varies from like 26 point something to 29 something, depending on the source you look at. I never knew that how long the moon went around the Earth was debatable, but apparently it is. So learned a lot of things during this project. So you've got that full cycle that's happening. And at the most basic level, you have this top half between a new moon and a full moon being the light moon, or some people will say the light of the moon, or the waxing or the growing, right? So during that, what we see from the Earth, which is what's shown here on the outside circle, is getting bigger, right? And then on the bottom half, you've got the dark of the moon, or the dark moon, or the waning. And then you can look specifically at kind of this last quarter, is sometimes referred to as the old or dark moon in particular. And I think on this one, you're going to hear, okay, so and at the most basic level, in this top half, you would plant above ground crops, and in the bottom half, you're going to plant root crops, right? That's the absolutely most basic level, but it does get more complicated. Typically, we're thinking about quarters as well. So this clip is going to be Jane Post, who is just outside of Berea. She's going to talk a little bit about that. She uses the Llewellyn's moon sign book, that blue book over there, that tells you when to do anything and everything. Like they run workshops from where they are. They do like mushroom cultivation workshops and all these things, and they try to schedule the workshops on days that are favorable. They try to send out notices for the workshops on days that are favorable for communication. And there's different days for electronic communication, like emails, versus like hard copy communication, like putting up flyers in town even. So it's like very specific, and it spells it all out for you. But she's going to talk about the quarters a little bit here.
The main thing is that there's the phases of the moon, so the first, second, third, and fourth quarter, and each quarter has something that you plant and or event that you do in the garden. So the first quarter, you would plant annuals, the second quarter, you're planting like stuff that produces fruit, the third quarter it would be bulbs and roots, and the fourth quarter you're cultivating and destroying your pests.
Yeah, so that's more specific, right, than just this basic that we just talked about. It breaks it up into the quarters. And so then we've got the quarters, but you've also got the specific zodiac signs that the moon is in. So in this picture, and I'm not going to spend a lot of time because you all saw that, but sort of the caption here is that you've got the 12 constellations that are considered part of the zodiac, right? And there are actually other ones, minor ones, that are sometimes included in some of the almanacs, but not all of the almanacs. So you've got this 360-degree pie that astrologers have basically evenly divided those slices of the pie, even though the constellations are actually, they differ in size, right? So there again is where it doesn't quite line up. It also doesn't quite line up because of the precession of the equinoxes, which is sort of because of the kind of the wobble in the Earth's axis, essentially. So things are not, when this system was devised thousands of years ago, the orientation of things has shifted slightly. It's not the same. And then there's also this tropical or sidereal calendar. So anyway, there's a lot of things going on. Any of these that you pick up is going to tell you in the beginning that their astrologer and or astronomer is the best, and they make the best calculations, and you should use their book. So that's kind of what they all have in common, is that they're going to tell you that it's secret and that they're the best. And that's, yeah, you don't really exactly know kind of what it's all been basing things on. We're all familiar with the tides, right? So we know that the moon does have an impact on bodies of water. And the tides happen because of those times in the day when the moon is closest to the earth. And so the general idea behind this is that in a seed or a plant, you've got moisture in there, right? It might be really small amounts, but you have moisture in there. And so there's going to be an impact of the moon cycle on moisture. And then the idea is that there also can be an impact that varies depending on what constellation the moon is aspected to in relation to the earth. So within a 28-month rotation, 28 days, rotation of the moon, give or take, around the earth, you've got 2 to 3 days when the moon is said to be in each sign, right? So we're familiar with sun sign in general, which is when, in this picture, the sun sign is in Leo, which is a specific time of the year, right? Like you might know that you're a Leo or you're a Gemini or you're whatever it is that you are based on your birthday. That's what this is. That's the sun sign. But the planting by the signs is looking at the moon sign in particular, right? So it doesn't mean if they say plant your beans in the Gemini, it's not saying you're planting them when the sun sign is in Gemini. It's saying when the moon sign is in Gemini. Okay. This is a version of the Almanac Man that was done by Heather Dent for the book that I really like it. I think it turned out great. But it is a common image that you'll find in a lot of these almanacs that shows which of the constellations is associated with what body part. And when I interviewed people, they very rarely would refer to the zodiac signs by these names. They usually talked about them in terms of the body part names. So when we hear clips here in just a little bit, you're going to hear them referred to by the body part names. They also each have kind of an element. So they're either water, fire, or earth signs, and the fire ones are considered like the barren signs when you wouldn't want to plant. And so you might hear some of that in clips too. Another, I'm just trying to decide which or how many clips. So one thing that I heard, actually, I'm going to play this one. So this is going to be Sarah Epperson, who's in Harlan County. And when I interviewed her, it was her aunt and her grandmother. So if you hear other people talking and chiming in, it's going to be either her aunt or grandmother. And she learned from her grandmother.
I combine a lot of what she told me, what they told you on about patients. You know, you take your signs in regards to like your own body, so things still grow up around better. And the top of the, and then find things below.
That's a very short one, but yeah, so just that general formula, that makes sense astronomically to line things up if it is always in the head that a certain part of the cycle starts, right? But that's not how it works, just because of the way things fall. It doesn't work out quite that way. But that was an interesting thing that I heard from that family, was that sort of above the waist and then below the waist for above and below ground. Okay. So I'm going to take a break from talking at you all for a little bit. I've spread around a number of different calendars, and I did not grab Post-its, but I have little cards too. So I'm going to have you all. Oh, you're going to help us do it. Yeah. So just jot down on. We'll take 5-6 minutes here for you to look at what you have near you, and if you can just look for these things. So some kind of activity that is designated to be done at a certain time, right? In what you have. And then anything that looks like it could have a scientific basis. I love that because it's like, well, let's see if it's anything that looks like it's science. Yeah. Still holding on to them. They must be able to get us out.
Pause the recording while they're doing activity.
Oh, yeah. Okay. So, what about the sort of good signs when you want to do things? So what you typically tend to see, the Cancer or breast is a really good kind of universal sign to plant anything. Scorpio, which is often called the loins or secrets. Those are another word that is used. Libra, as I mentioned, for flowers, particularly potatoes come up as being planted on the old moon. Some people say in the feet or Pisces, but some say no. And then some folks say anything that there are two of. I'm not exactly sure who we're going to hear from on this one because I didn't make a note of it. So we'll see what they have to say. And then I'll tell you afterwards who it is.
I always will do things and stuff in the arm. Like
Yeah, so that was that family of three generations of women. Myrtle Turner was the grandmother that you heard from. Mostly they're saying anything that there are two. So that's kind of a, I guess, a shorthand to try to remember the good ones. And it does capture most of them. It does capture some that aren't listed as favorable ones in all of them, but for the most part, it kind of lines up. So that makes some sense. You heard her talk about beans in the arms or the Gemini. That's one that you hear really common in Appalachian. So I've listed up here who says yes for that. And but other people that I interviewed said no, that is not a good sign. It is not generally it's not one of the generally universally good signs to plant in. But for some reason, beans in particular, or vining things like peas, there's this kind of tradition of them being planted on the in the arms, or the Gemini, or the twin. It's all 3 different names for the same thing, which there's a new language that you learn when you get into this stuff. This is going to be Mary Overby from Laurel County.
When we were growing up, Mom would find the things and the signs for my eye. I always try to think, that's good. I don't like to plant beans on tree leaves. They just throw it in the ground and then which I hope we can use to buy them.
So you switched the vision.
And that's kind of interesting because things have shifted, right? As time has shifted. So maybe there's a reason that the Gemini used to be good and it's not anymore, right? So, it's all very, very fascinating. Yeah, hard to know if there's a lot there. The sort of universally barren signs are typically Aries or the head, Leo heart. And then also some sources say that you should avoid transition periods. So when the sign is moving from one to another, that you wouldn't want to plant things then. Yeah, and this I think is going to be Jane Post again, who uses the Llewellyns talking about barren signs.
And this spells it out. I mean, I don't even really have to know anything, so it spells it out too. It has like October the 26th, it's in the 3rd quarter, Gemini, and cultivate, destroy weeds, and pest, harvest fruits and crops for food. And so it's dry. It's usually dry after the 4th quarter too, after the moon, after the full moon happens. Get in these barren signs, it's really dry, and that's when you want to cultivate the ground. Like just recently, it was so wet, and then all of a sudden, dried up in the ground cracked, and that was the 4th quarter. And I could have, tilled. I should have tilled. We should have tilled that at the time. So.
All right. There's also a number of special days that came up in interviews, and some of them come up in the calendars and almanacs. There are these things called Ember days, which are determined by the liturgical calendar, and they are like the Wednesday, Friday, and Saturday. And they all get oriented based on when Easter is calculated, which also varies some, which I didn't know before I did research here, that there's like debate about when exactly Easter falls, but Easter is set according to astronomically what is going on. It is set, according to a full moon. So Good Friday comes up quite a bit, and that makes sense because it's very close to Easter. Valentine's Day, a lot of people say plant your peas on Valentine's Day. It's just very common. It's not in any of these almanacs or calendars. And then President's Day came up in one of them. Aside from planting, and I'm keeping an eye on time, I'm going to try to wrap up here in a couple of minutes. So if you guys have any questions, aside from planting, there are other things like we'll listen here to Mary Overby again. She's going to talk about sauerkraut.
Well, when we went to make sauerkraut, keep there, so line up with your crowds. When the sound like vinyl, it'll turn as dark as it can be. Smell real bad. I like to mostly in the mix, the thighs, don't do it repeated. Breast is time.
The only one that we usually do in 5 dead is weekend.
And you can do it.
That would be on the-
Yeah. Not good, because it's not long, it's going out.
Yeah, so that was Mary Overby at the first, and then you heard the grandmother and granddaughter going back and forth there a little bit. Another thing is weaning, and I won't play that clip, but you're supposed to wean when the signs are in the knees and then as they're going down through the feet. And supposedly you can wean animals, babies, much easier if you do it when that's where the signs are. Also getting your teeth pulled or any kind of surgery. You're supposed to make sure, like if you're scheduling to get teeth pulled, you don't want it to be when the signs are in the head or you will bleed more. If you're getting any kind of medical procedure, you don't want the signs to be close to that part of the body because supposedly there will be bleeding worse in that part of the body. What about proof, right? You all are a STEM class. You've been talking about science. Where is it for this stuff? There's really not much. There's not like any peer-reviewed scientific journal articles on this stuff, right? The sort of chart that you saw in the Foxfire reading that had all 12 signs and when you should do what, that was available for a long time from this guy, T.E. Black. You could, write him in the mail. You may have seen that little note. I think you sent him $1 or something, and he sent you his calendar. He said that was based on a 13-year experiment. A woman, Mariah Thun, in Germany, actually established the biodynamic calendar, and she did a lot of research in the 30s and 40s and did like super complex stuff with like harvests of oil crops. She looked at manure and that was composted, that was like collected under different signs. So you're supposed to collect your manure to compost it when it's under a certain sign. All kinds of really interesting, complicated things. There are pictures in here of stuff, and you know that the seed source was the same, and they look really different, like carrots that are planted under different signs that look really different. Some of them are much more forked than others. Some of them are shorter, and then you have like the right sign, it's nice and long. Preserving, like when you should preserve and can different things. She did all kinds of experiments. None of it is replicated, right? None of it is like statistically analyzed. So from it definitely would not get into a scientific peer-reviewed journal article, right? But it's sort of like, it's pretty compelling, and she spent a lot of time and effort into an incredible number of experiments looking at all sorts of different things that the biodynamic calendar is based on. Her grandson, so she is no longer with us, but her grandson is continuing to do this work in Germany. They continue to have experiments that they're doing to sort of keep things going. So this is like the updated kind of version that has stuff from her grandson in here too. So there's that. There's this book called Planetary Planting that was published in the 70s. And its author, Louise Riot, says that she, based this off of her 30 years of gardening, right, is how she came up with that. Someone that I interviewed, Phil Pace, in Frankfurt, he does I know you kids aren't on Facebook anymore, but if any of you are, he does a Facebook page called Planting by the Signs. And he has a whole bunch of followers. I think also maybe it goes on Twitter. And anyway, he did this great tomato project that was apparently published in the Frankfurt State Journal, but I worked with a librarian at KSU, and we tried to find these, and we just could not find, we could not find those articles, and he didn't have them in his records. Lots of individual testimonials, right? Like you heard in some of those clips, people that'll say they tried something and it did or didn't work. There certainly is evidence that sap flow changes can be influenced by this stuff. So either during a solar eclipse or with the tides, again, this is not like an area where there's lots of people doing research, but you know, there's a tiny bit of stuff there that maybe means there's something there. And so it seems like, you know, there's this cultural practice that is still being done, that has been handed down through generations. You know, is there something there? I don't know, maybe, you know. People have asked me if I would be interested in testing it scientifically, and honestly, I'm not, because I don't want to, you know, I just think it's a really interesting thing, and I would hate to do the science and show that there's nothing to it, right? Like, I don't want to do that. I did when I was, I guess 2 summers ago when COVID, you know, COVID first hit right in March, we all left campus, and that summer I tried really hard when I grew my garden I used the Gardening by the Moon calendar, which you can get at Good Foods Co-op here in Lexington. You can get that calendar. It's a nice, really easy one if you do want to try. I tried to follow it. I had the best garden I've ever had. I also had way more time to be out in my garden than I ever have, right? So like, there's no way for me to know, you know, oh, it's because I planted by the sign. So, yeah, I guess the last thing, these are all the different people that I interviewed. Meg's beautiful portraits, except for this one, she was sick that day. You can tell this picture I took, and it's not nearly as good, but it was great, you know, to get to spend time with all these folks. And yeah, I think with that, it's like 3:47, so I don't know, 3 minutes for questions or.
Let's make our secret and we'll have one question.
Yeah.
In regards to the moon's orbit, does geographic location on Earth play a factor?
Yes, that's a good question. I have to think about that. Yes, it does, although the scale is going to be such that it would, like, all of the US is going to be kind of under one thing, right? So most of these calendars are for the US. But if you are on the, I'm trying to think about that, I feel like I need to go back to I will tell you that this, like, understanding the astronomy of what is happening is not intuitive to me. It's like involved a lot of stretching of my brain. And so I think I want the next one actually. So I have to think about that because even if you're on the other side of the Earth, the moon aspect is still the same. So because it's all about the orientation of the moon to the Earth. So it doesn't actually matter where you are in the Earth. So I got to the answer. It just took me a second. I needed to look at this, but yeah, good question. But the calculations of the specific time, so that's the thing where it gets tricky because a lot of these calendars will have, like, you know, we're in whatever sign we are now until 2:43 a.m. tonight, and then we shift over into the next. That stuff is gonna be more specific to where you geographically are. Yeah.
Something you said for intuition, and that's where this comes in, because we're scientists, and it's thought to use the scientific method to lock something in or prove this proof. Thank you. Not yet, anyway, or anyway, I'm not even right, but what I'm saying is that intuition, I think is important, allowing yourself freedom to go places and test stuff. You can't be really strict about that. And I think there's a little bit of line sometimes between intuition, magic, whatever you want to call it, and reality and science. Because science is about quantifying nature, and nature is nature.
Yeah.
So anyway,
Yeah.
I see how this fits in my mind.
Yeah. Yeah, and there's a huge, you can think about how when people on a daily basis, this is what they did, right? This is what you did every day. You went out and you made sure that you had food to eat for that day. Like, yeah, and you're going to notice these things and you're going to make note of patterns and you're going to do all that. You know, we are in a completely different situation now, right? We are very disconnected from what's going on. And a lot of people that I interviewed said, you know, if they had, for instance, a full-time job, like it's really hard to do this because you have to look at the calendar, you have to plan things out, you have to say, okay, the good days are 4 and 5 days from now. You have to hope the weather lines up, all that stuff. If that's what you're doing full-time, it's kind of doable, but it becomes, you know, most of us, right? We're just trying to get some seeds in the ground when we get a chance. Like that's the best we can do. So yeah, thanks, Claudia. Appreciate that.
Let's thank our speaker again. Feel free to come up and chat further and.
Yeah, and y'all can just leave this stuff. I don't really care about the note cards. I just sometimes it's helpful to me to write something down. So